Chapter 3, Presence, Boundaries, and Lawful Power. Abstract. This chapter articulates presence as the operational core through which quiet excellence and holistic healing are enacted in real-world leadership and governance contexts. Presence is defined as an embodied, regulated, and ethically responsive capacity that allows authority to be exercised without coercion and within lawful boundaries. Integrating leadership ethics, trauma-informed neuroscience, consent theory, and public interest law, the chapter demonstrates that power becomes legitimate only when presence and boundaries function together. Absence of presence leads to reactive domination or withdrawal, while absence of boundaries enables abuse even under benevolent intentions. Presence is therefore framed as a daily discipline and civic responsibility essential to nonviolent, lawful, and trustworthy leadership. Keywords: presence, lawful power, boundaries, consent, ethical leadership, nonviolence, governance. 3.1 From Concept to Practice: Why Presence Matters. Chapters 1 and 2 established quiet excellence and holistic healing as ethical foundations for leadership. This chapter moves from foundation to practice by examining presence as the mechanism through which ethical intention becomes ethical action. Without presence, leadership frameworks remain aspirational. With presence, they become operative. Presence is not charisma, confidence, or performance, nor is it mere attentiveness. Presence refers to the leader's capacity to remain somatically regulated, ethically oriented, and legally aware while engaged in relational or institutional power dynamics. It is the condition that allows leaders to sense boundaries, honor consent, and choose restraint over impulse. In the absence of presence, power defaults to habit, threat response, or institutional inertia. Presence therefore functions as the gateway between inner regulation and outer authority. 3.2 Defining presence: An operational account. Presence is defined as the capacity to remain embodied, regulated, and ethically responsive while exercising influence or authority within lawful and relational boundaries. This definition emphasizes three interdependent dimensions. First, embodiment anchors ethical agency in the nervous system. Presence requires awareness of physiological state and its influence on perception and decision-making. Second, regulation enables responsiveness rather than reactivity under stress. Third, ethical responsiveness ensures that action remains aligned with consent, dignity, and legal norms. Presence can be operationally identified through observable behaviors: tolerance for silence, ability to delay action, openness to dissent, respect for process, and consistency between stated values and enacted power. These markers distinguish integrated presence from performative leadership displays. 3.3 Power without presence: Pathways to harm. Power exercised without presence is a primary pathway to ethical failure. When leaders act from dysregulated states, authority becomes fused with threat response. This fusion often manifests as domination, micromanagement, emotional withdrawal, or moral absolutism. Trauma-informed research demonstrates that under stress, individuals revert to habitual patterns that prioritize control or avoidance. In leadership contexts, these patterns translate into coercive decision-making, consent override, and boundary collapse. Importantly, harm may occur even when leaders believe they are acting in service of safety or efficiency. By identifying absence of presence as a risk factor rather than a moral flaw, this framework shifts attention toward capacity building rather than blame. 3.4 Boundaries as ethical and legal infrastructure. Boundaries function as the external counterpart to presence. While presence governs internal regulation and ethical orientation, boundaries define the limits within which power may be exercised. Boundaries are constituted through law, policy, role clarity, and consent standards. Ethical leadership requires boundaries that are explicit, stable, and enforceable. Absence of boundaries enables exceptionalism, the belief that one's intentions justify exemption from rules. Such beliefs are among the most reliable predictors of abuse in organizational and institutional settings. Lawful boundaries provide structural containment that complements individual presence. Together, they prevent the concentration of unchecked power and protect the dignity of those subject to authority. 3.5 Presence without boundaries. Boundaries without presence. Presence and boundaries are necessary but insufficient when held in isolation. Presence without boundaries risks relational overreach, favoritism, or informal coercion. Boundaries without presence risk rigidity, alienation, and procedural harm. Lawful power emerges only when presence and boundaries operate together. Presence ensures that boundaries are applied with discernment and care. Boundaries ensure that presence does not slide into discretion without accountability. This dynamic relationship defines ethical authority. 3.6, a law ethics practice matrix of lawful power. To operationalize the integration of presence and boundaries, this chapter introduces a law ethics practice matrix. Domain legal principle, ethical orientation, leadership, practice, consent, informed consent standards, dignity, participatory decision-making, safety, violence prevention law, nonviolence, conflict containment and de-escalation, power, due process and accountability, responsibility, transparent and reviewable authority. This matrix demonstrates how presence is translated into lawful action across organizational, governmental, and technological contexts. 3.7, presence in complex and technological systems. In contemporary governance, leaders increasingly exercise power through mediated systems, such as algorithms, metrics, and automated decision tools. Presence in such contexts requires heightened ethical awareness, as distance from affected individuals can obscure harm. Presence-oriented leadership demands that decision makers remain accountable for the ethical impact of systems they design or deploy. Absence of presence in technological governance risks encoding coercive or extractive logics into systems that operate at scale. Quiet excellence therefore extends presence beyond face-to-face interaction into design, oversight, and accountability structures. 3.8, cultivating presence as a daily discipline. Presence is not a static trait, but a cultivated capacity. It is developed through practices that support regulation, reflection, and ethical clarity. These practices may include disciplined rest, structured decision protocols, reflective supervision, and respect for legal process. Importantly, presence cannot be demanded from others. It must be modeled by those in authority. Leaders who consistently demonstrate presence establish cultures in which restraint, consent, and accountability are normalized. 3.9, presence as civic responsibility. Beyond individual leadership effectiveness, presence carries civic significance. Leaders who exercise presence contribute to public trust, institutional legitimacy, and violence prevention. In contrast, absence of presence erodes confidence in authority and accelerates social fragmentation. By framing presence as a civic responsibility, quiet excellence links personal discipline to collective well-being. Presence becomes not merely a leadership skill, but an ethical commitment to govern without harm. 3.10, conclusion, lawful power and the ethics of restraint. This chapter has articulated presence as the operational core of quiet excellence and holistic healing. By integrating embodied regulation, ethical responsiveness, and lawful boundaries, presence enables power to be exercised without coercion. Lawful power emerges where restraint, consent, and accountability are upheld. Together, chapters 1 through 3 establish quiet excellence as a coherent ethical framework for leadership, governance, and emerging technological systems. One grounded not in domination or spectacle, but in regulation, law, and human dignity.